ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the post-Sydney episode of the Bombercast for season 2024. I'm Bonser34, and I'm not joined by the Grizz this week. The Grizz had another engagement, I believe, or he's just simply sick of Essendon. It's one of the two. Instead, I'm joined by Kip Tastic. How are you, mate?
I'm good, Bonser. Thanks for having me. I've been waiting all year for the call-up, and now the season's over. You finally throw me a pity episode, so thanks for that.
It's a little bit like if Lewis Hayes is picked this week, mate. We just bring you in for one game. It means nothing. It's a bit late in the season, but that's just the way it works.
That's okay. It's always good to join you and chat the Bombers, even if the results haven't been the best.
No, I think we'd all agree that the results in recent times haven't been that great, and Friday night, unfortunately, wasn't much better than what we've seen this year. So it was the same old story in the first half. We had all the attack, we had all the inside 50s, we had all the dominance, and we just could not score. And then Sydney came out, went bang, bang, bang. And I don't want to say they turned up their toes, but it does feel a little bit like when the side goes bang, 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 the players drop their heads and don't seem to recover.
Yeah, it felt like, the first half could have easily been, or the review of the first half, I imagine, for the players is a lot of the same messages that have come through in the last 3 weeks post sort of that St Kilda game. Those games against Gold Coast and Fremantle have both sort of been similar games in the way in which they've played out. It felt like in the second half that the players tried to take the game on a lot more and go through the corridor. And I think when our skills aren't the best and you're coming up against a side like a Sydney that is really well drilled and takes such advantage of turnover, that unless we were perfect with our disposal, we were going to give them those opportunities to score on the rebound there. And unfortunately, that's the way it played out, even though we were leading going into halftime.
It's funny you mentioned that we come back through the corridor, because I tend to agree, but also it still just felt to me watching the game that Sydney were a lot more direct. And if you look at the team stats, that probably lines up a little bit. So you look at kicks, and Sydney had 228, we had 217, so had 11 more kicks than us. You look at handballs, we had 46 more handballs than the Swans, which clearly to me just indicates we probably overused it. We just handball ran around in circles, which does tend to happen, I suppose, when you lose, or when you're a side down on confidence. Your first thought is to just get rid of the ball as quickly as possible, which is usually handball off to a teammate who, unfortunately, is probably under a bit of pressure, and then they just keep doing the same chain, and then the kick doesn't work, which also does lead to our forward 50 entries that a lot of them, we get repeat entries, but a lot of them are just dump kicks long.
I think it's sort of a vicious cycle, really, isn't it? We don't trust our disposal very well, either coming out from halfback or entering the forward line. And so because of that, we tend to go the long way around. We go around the wings. We come into the forward 50 through the flanks because that's the way we've gone. We don't want to take the risk of going into the middle and giving up those turnovers like we have against sides this year, and they've shot down the other end and scored a goal. And so we overpossess the ball. It allows time for the opposition to get back into defensive positions. Further to that, our forwards really do not have great leading patterns. So often you'll see players just, calling for the ball over the back and being really stagnant with that. So it doesn't create opportunities to, open up space. There are a few players we've got. Harry Jones is really good at getting space for his teammates, but a lot of our players really do like that kick over the back and being really stagnant. So it all sorts of compounds together to get to the position we're in, where we are over-possessing the ball, like you said. It's meaning that we're not getting great forward entries. It's meaning we're finding it difficult to score. We're doing really well at getting the ball back off the opposition, but we're not taking advantage of that. And then the second that we do give up the ball because of the positions that we find ourselves in, it's very easy for them to go down the other end and score. So it is a big concern going into next year. I think there's a lot to like about the way we played this year and way you played against Sydney, particularly in that first half. But it also really highlights the things that need to improve in this team going forward.
I fully agree with what you're saying there about our players like to be stagnant and like to get the kick over the back. And it's something that you really notice when you get to a game and you sit in the stands and you watch. You do notice that our forwards don't generally lead up at the ball. It's one of the most infuriating things to watch as a football fan, because we all know that the old adage is, you lead at the ball carrier. And that obviously does lead to the dump kicks long. But I guess that it is a little bit of what's the chicken and what's the egg, isn't it? Because our players don't lead up, we dump kick long. But are they not leading because they know they're getting ignored by the dump kicks going over the top of their head? I actually said during the game thread when we were in about halfway through that second quarter was we needed shallower entries into our forward 50. So a lot of our balls were being put 20, 25 metres out. And Sydney just put 7 defenders back there and just spoiled everyone, brought it to ground and kicked it out. I wanted shallower entries in that. I wanted people to start trying to hit up a target, even if it's 55 out. Now we're not many players going to kick a goal from 55 metres out, but it does draw a player towards you. And then that creates a little bit of space. And then you get the next one that draws a little bit of space and so on and so forth. And that's another way around it. But for whatever reason, our players just don't seem smart enough to be able to adapt to that and just keep thumping it in, hoping that we're going to get a massive pack mark from Sam Draper, who admittedly has taken some of those this year, but it's not his one wood. So we really are. And then, of course, we don't have a genuine quick small forward at the moment that gets on the ball and scores a lot of goals. And I know Jai Menzies is the fan favourite for a couple of posters. He's also the whipping boy for a lot more. But yeah, we don't have that small crumbing forward we can rely on to be at the feet of the Drapers or the caddy when he doesn't bring it down. And that's also it just compounds the issue that we've got up front.
Yeah, and I think to look on the optimistic side of that, I think it's become clear that is a real weakness of the club, and it's certainly something that I think they've identified for a while is a weakness ever since Tipper started falling away. We've had cracks at a lot of small forwards from other clubs, Roses from Gold Coast, and then Bobby Hill. Obviously, we didn't get across the line, and then he obviously goes to Collingwood and does so well there.
Tyson Stengel, the other one from Geelong, yeah. We had a crack in him.
Tyson Stengel this year, good call there. So it's clear that they've recognised that this is a big issue for the club. And I think probably the news that the NGA rules would change for this year may have changed their thinking going into next year now that they know that they can get Isaac Kako. Because when we were really pressing for Stengel early in the year, or the talk was we were pressing for him earlier in the year, those rules were still the old rules that came in after the Bulldogs snagged Jamara, and Melbourne lost out on Mac Andrew because of those rules. So I think him coming in is going to change potentially who they target to fill that. But then, as you say, is the way that we're playing in these games where we are getting a lot of territory, but we're not getting a lot of clean ball into the forward line, is that going to change the structure and the game plan, or are they going to try and get the personnel in to make that work? It's going to be really interesting. And I feel with the way we approach the off-season, we'll get a fair idea of how they want to go about it next year. Are they trying to get players in who can, do those things within the current game structure, like take big pack marks, like crumb, and create goals from the balls that are on the ground? Or are they going to try and bring in other players that maybe suggest a shift in the way we try and play the game?
It's interesting that you did mention Mac Andrews there, because I watched the game against the D's and he went from being the sharpshooter, Tony Lockett, against us to couldn't hit the side of a barn against Melbourne. So I was watching him take some shots for goal, and I was thinking, where was this last week? Give us a break, for crying out loud. But yeah, you're right. I think you're right in saying that Isaac Kako has changed how we're going to approach our off-season in terms of the small forward. I would caution, of course, though, there is that issue then that you talk about, the fact that maybe we're putting our eggs in one basket. Now, I know I've got the Davey twins, but they're copping a bit of a hammering as well at the moment with some of the supporters. And you tend to feel for these young blokes, because they do come in and they've got the weight of the world on their shoulders, and they've got 20 years of failure and misery behind them. But it's not their fault. So it's always a tough one when the youngsters come in. But yeah, I'm very excited to see how we go with Kako. And I'll talk about Peter Wright for a moment. So Zach Package put up an interesting post during the week that's been raised to me, that he's very much a confidence player. So now Zach's of the opinion that some of those mental demons stem from the fact that the club basically turned their back on him when he got suspended. Now, I disagree with this summation that we turned our back on him. I think we just got shafted by some pretty poor rules, and I'm not sure if you listened, Kit, but I just about went ballistic at Grizz during the time. It was about the only time I think Grizz has been close to hanging up on me. So, it is tough, but I think he's right in saying that you can't go into a game with Sam Draper, who is not a forward, and you can't go into a game with Nate Caddy, who's young and flies everything, as your two key forwards, and expect to win. Now, I know Peter Wright's out on form, but he's still averaging a goal and a half a game, and he's not having the same presence. But was he ever a great presence? Is probably my question to you. He's always been that bloke that can get on his bike or take a mark out in front. And we saw it. I think a lot of us remember the Bulldogs game where he kicked 8 goals and took a lot of contested marks. But that wasn't him. That's not his game style, really. That's a one in a million game, and I doubt we'll see that style from him again on a regular basis. So, do you think not playing right is hurting us at the moment?
I mean, do you think he's going to be if we were playing him now, he'd be in that congested forward line, and as you say, he's not the big pack mark player. Are we really going to be getting much more out of him than we are from, say, Sam Draper playing as that full forward target?
But he does lead more, I think, more than Draper. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he. I mean, he's not the get on your bike Nick Riewoldt type, but Draper, I think, is a lot more flat-footed than Peter.
Yeah, I think that's a fair call. Do I think Peter Wright playing means we win a couple of those games that we didn't, like the Gold Coast game potentially? He's such a good kick and he's such a good kick at Marvel that how open that forward line was against Gold Coast, he probably would have got on a couple and have a chance for a shot. Maybe we win that. But it's much as like we had, if we're playing right, we're not playing Brian. Like that's pretty much the base of it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And are we getting more out of the fact that we've got two basically, first ruckman playing in the side and making do with Draper? Or do we play Draper? Because it's going to be Draper. It's never going to be Brian and Wright, is it? It's going to be Draper and Wright. Are we getting more across the ground by playing Brian and Draper versus Draper and Wright? And given Wright's form, I would say that you're probably getting more out of Brian and Draper at the moment in terms of being able to compete at stoppage and compete in the centre square. And Brian's obviously shown a bit around the ground and Draper's shown a bit forward. Obviously, against the Swans, it didn't really work out that time. But again, I think both of those have shown a bit more. And I think at the moment, if you were to judge the last few weeks, I think the Brian-Draper combo is a better combo than the Draper-Wright. That's not to mean next year is going to be the same. But I think at this stage, with the form Wright was in, that going with the Brian-Draper combo has been the way to go.
If you've touched on something there, Kip, that I think is going to be probably the biggest question we have to answer as a football club in the off-season, and that is, what do we do with our forward line and our rucks? Because you're right, we can't play Peter Wright, Sam Draper, Nick Bryan, Nate Caddy all in the same forward line when you also have Langford and Stringer there as well, because it's very top heavy, it's very slow, and what's the movement going to be? There is talk that one of them will have to go. I personally think Sam Draper may be out the door. It may be slightly controversial to say that, but I think Adelaide are going to have a real crack at him. Whether or not he's worth the money they're reportedly offering, I mean, I'm not sure. But I think if he goes, then Wright can probably slide back in. But if he doesn't go, if we go into this next year with those 4 plus Stringer and Langford again, one of them doesn't play, and it's going to be a very fascinating watch to see what happens, because I thought Brian was quite good on Friday night against Brody Grundy. So I think Grundy edged him in the hit-outs by 1. Disposals-wise, I think Brian and Grundy were fairly similar. What I like about Nick Bryan, though, and one of the knocks in the VFL is he's not very physical, and he probably hasn't been the physical dominance ruckman that we get from Draper. And the word dominance probably overstating Draper a little bit, but he's not that physical presence. But the opposition ruckmen haven't been able to take easy marks, so there's been no get out of jail for those guys. So I think Brian has always managed to contest, and Grundy didn't actually take a mark on Friday night, which was surprising. I mean, he doesn't take 50 marks a game, but he has averaged three marks a game for most of his career. I think this year he's going just under 2.5. So you would have expected him to at least grab 1 or 2. But Nick just seems to be competing well at the moment, and he's getting a chance, which is really pleasing to see.
Yeah, I think just you've gone through a couple of points there, so I'll try and get through it all. I guess
I'm monologued a little bit. Sorry, mate.
No, that's all right. Starting with your last point on Brian, just obviously we ran Brian and Draper, and they ran Grundy and McLean for the most part. So I think if Brian's playing as a first ruck, he's probably getting a bit more. It was probably a fairly even contest between Brian and Grundy there, and that's a really good sign for Nick Bryan in terms of where he's going in the future. I think there's, as you say, with the VFL, there's been a few question marks of whether he can step up to AFL, and I think over the last few weeks he's really shown that he's more than capable and ready to be a full-time seniors player next year. And then just sort of reversing back to the forward line, I agree with what you're saying in that there's, and I think I've thought this for a long time, there's too many medium to tall players in our forward line. Absolutely. You look at the best side. You look at the best sides. The best sides at the moment have those small forwards, those dangerous smalls that can get around. Some of them are good, at marking and finding space. Others are good at that crumbing aspect, and we just don't have that at this stage. I think we're asking a lot of Gresham. I feel like if we had a specific role for Gresham, he'd be performing better, and he did perform better earlier in the year. These last few weeks we've asked him, he's got to be a lead up forward, and he's got to be a marking target, and he's got to be a crummer. I think we're asking a lot of him, given that we haven't been playing a lot of effective small forwards. So I know there's been some criticism of him and his performances lately. So I think that should make people think a bit more about what he's being asked to do. But on that medium to tall forward, I think, as you say, one of them has to go. And I think one of them has to go out of the club. I think it's pretty clear that there's real question marks on whether the club wants to keep Stringer, given he hasn't even seemed to have received a contract offer at this stage. I think of all the ones, I think he's most likely to go, and I would be comfortable with that. Yes, he's a match winner. Yes, he does great things for us, but the gap between his best and his worst is getting bigger, and he creates a lot of other issues. There's a lot of other issues that create in the forward line, even though he's been really good, even though he's probably going to finish as our leading goal kicker, even though he's really good at that forward 50 pressure when he's on. I think we need to move forward without him, and if he does leave, I don't think that's a bad thing. And then, if Stringer does stay, does that mean that Langford has to move out, or do you try and move Peter Wright on with his contract there? There's a lot of questions there, but I think you're right. I think there's space that one of them has to go, and I think we have to remember that when we move these players on, it should be seen as an opportunity. Everyone lambasted Collingwood for the way that they handled their cap space problem, and that was a self-created problem, but they used that to then create opportunities for them. And that's why, to throw another name out there, if Ben Hobbs goes, that's going to create an opportunity to do something else. And when you've got talent that's wasting it in the VFL, and yes, I know Hobbs has been playing in the senior side recently, but he's not playing in the role that he was selected for, and he's probably unlikely to play that role next year with the way our midfielders have gone, unless you've gone through those, get a lot of injuries. And unfortunately, we don't really want that to happen. You can turn him into an asset that will benefit you in other ways. So I think we do get attached to players, and I think we need to think about how we can make use some of our assets where we have plenty to try and fill some of the holes that we have in the side. So I've monologued there, and now I've gone
on a tangent, just like you talked about Ben Hobbs. There's another player that keeps getting raised as potential trade bait, and that's Darcy Parish. And again, he's been mentioned. His name keeps popping up all over the forum, all over our threads about potentially moving him on. If it's a choice between Ben Hobbs or Darcy Parish, which way are you leaning? I'll say right now that I'm leaning towards Ben Hobbs purely because I'm not bullish about our flag chances while Darcy's career is still running. So if we can cash in on Darcy and get, say, a first rounder for him, I'm probably okay with that. But I can also see the other side where Darcy Parish is a very good player and is clearly better than Ben Hobbs at the moment. So if we want to try and get a flag sooner rather than later, Parish is the one we keep.
I would let Hobbs go. If you're letting Darcy Parish go, you're saying to Zach Merritt, sorry, Zach, we don't see us winning a flag with you unless you can say we are going to turn Darcy Parish into this player, and this player is going to help us win the flag. So I think we need to keep. I would keep Darcy, and I think Hobbs has more value.
Hobbs has more value. That's interesting.
Hobbs has more value than younger, and I think. The ideal for me in this scenario is you look at a team like Richmond. Richmond's got, if all those players that are said to be leaving Richmond do so, they're going to have a ton of first round picks. And I think Hobbs is sort of in that. Hobbs as he currently is probably in that late first, early second bracket of where his value is. But if you look at someone like Richmond, because they're going to have all these first round picks, they might be more happy to give it something of a bit higher value just to get the deal done and get him in there. And he can be someone that they build with over the next 5 or so years. And so you could then use that to turn it into something you need, whether that's a small forward right now, or whether that's a good user of the ball off half back that you can then, push Martin into different positions on the ground. I think he's a chip that we could use. I've talked about Brian being a chip we could use in the past. I think I'm leaning more towards him staying now, as I see there's the potential for that Brian Draper combo to work. But yeah, I think I look at someone like Hobbs. I know there's been talk about Hobbs and Sartis as potentially being disgruntled and wanting to leave. And if I had to pick between those two, who I would keep, I'd be keeping Sartis 10 times out of 10. So I think Hobbs is a potential player we could look at moving on to try and solve some other issues that our side has.
Fancy ball user off the halfback flank. Wonder where we could possibly have found one of those in the last couple of years. But I won't mention his name because I've mentioned his name multiple times on here, and I'll stop flogging that dead horse. The other key thing about next year, of course, is Dylan Shield is unlikely to stay. I would say he's proven in the last 6 weeks that he can still play AFL football. He's still got a lot to offer, but I just don't think he's going to be offering it at the Essendon Football Club. And to be honest, he's probably the most hard done by player I think we've had in the last. When was the saga? That was about 2014, 2016. We'll go the last 5 years because I don't want to go much further because you could probably start talking saga players. But because Dylan Shield, let's be honest, we sold him the story when we had Fantasia, when we had Saad, when we had Danaher, and then 12 months, 18 months later, all three were gone and our flag chances were shot to hell. So he came because he thought we were in our window. We probably were when he came. That disappeared rather quickly through circumstances that are not necessarily our own making. I think you could mount a reasonable argument that Danaher and Fantasia left for reasons other than what was happening at Essendon, and then I think Saad just saw the dollar signs, and again, can't blame him for that. So Dylan Shield moves on. That does open up a spot in the midfield, but I don't know if it's the right spot for the Hobbs or Sartis. But it does then lead me to go, we still play Zach Merritt as a starting mid, inside mid. Is it time that we look at him as a Class C user across the halfback flank, aka like a Caleb Daniel, and that would open up the spot for, say, Sartis to move into next year?
That's not a bad shout. I've always liked Merritt on the half forward line. I think he's that sort of player that can play on the half forward line, and he's dangerous forward, but he's also the player that can go up at the stoppage and have an impact. So I tend to think that if you were to move Zach Merritt somewhere, I'd move him to half forward, but I can see where you're coming from in terms of getting him on that half back line and helping move the ball. And someone like Zach could help us be more dangerous with our ball movement from the half back line and you trying to find that corridor a little bit more. If Shield goes, I think that's Sartis' spot. I get the sense that over the last few weeks, the club has told, and I'm just basing this off the fact that he seems to be developing pretty well in the VFL. He's been told to go and work on his game, and there's a spot there at the start of next year for him, assuming that the club knows that Dylan Shield's going to leave and he's been playing in the senior side these past few weeks. I think that's his spot next year, and I think he's been working hard towards that. I think the noise coming out from the people who've been able to watch the VFL closely is that he's really improved a lot of the things in his game that we were concerned about at the start of the year. So I think if Shield goes, that's Sartis' spot. And even if Shield doesn't go, I think Sartis is a real chance of being first team selection come round 1 next year.
So we've talked about players that are potentially going to move out. And it's very sad that we're doing this with a round of football left. But unfortunately, as Essendon fans, that's what we get to do. My question to you now is, players that are coming in, there is a Melbourne player by the name of Christian Petrarca who would be perfect for us. Let's be honest, he'd be perfect for most sides. Are we at that stage as a club where going and using 2 first-round picks on a Christian Petrarca makes sense, given that we are going to get a first rounder this year regardless in Kako?
It's not a bad year to do it, really, is it, if you got that? But I think you probably need more than 2 first-round picks to get Petrarca, especially with this length of deal. He's going to make any side better. Is he going to be enough to make us a premiership side? is one player ever that good? You look at what happened with Judd. You look at us with Dylan Shield. Like, neither bringing in these gun players, and I think Petrarca's probably somewhere in between Judd when he arrived at Carlton and Shield when he came to Essendon in terms of performance. Judd obviously being at the peak there. We'd win more games with him. Would we be able to challenge the best sides? I'm not 100% sure. You need a mountain to get him out there. And I think there's a couple of points being made that if the future trading of 2 years in advance came in, then I think you'd be more interested in being able to have a crack there. But I think you're probably giving up a heap to get him over the line. And again, there's not even any guarantee that he's going to be performing at the same level he was pre-injury, given the extent of his injuries there. So it's a tough one. If he approached you and said he wanted to come, I think you'd probably have to try and make it work. But going out there really hard to get him, I'm not sure is the right call.
Yeah, and you're right. The severity of the injuries would absolutely have to play a factor in as to how hard we'd go, because we have seen players come back from similar injuries and not be the same as what they were. And we have a couple of minutes left, Kip, so we will very, very briefly touch on the Brisbane game. There's talk now that Dyson Heppel will get a game. It's not a farewell game in Melbourne, as some people wanted. There's been a lot of debate, I'm told, about that this week. I haven't really paid much attention to it, but been told that's a bit of a hot topic. Is it nice that if he gets a farewell game that he'll have Joe Danaher and Conor McKenna there to cheer him off as he walks off the ground for one last time? Yeah,
I was thinking that, although Joe probably will miss the exit and take him into the crowd there instead of going the straight way. So, look, yeah, there's not much else to talk about with this game, really, is there? It's
the dead rubber, and I think they're going to use it to smash us to get ready for finals. Is my
nothing to play for. Brisbane still have theoretical chance of top four. I hope they don't go out there with that attitude, though. I think one of the differences between this year and last year, even though we're going to basically end with the same win-loss ratios, we haven't given it away at the end of the year. Yes, we went down to 39 points by Sydney, but that wasn't an effort problem. That was an execution problem compared to how things went against GWS and the Pies in particular at the end of last year. There's definitely some improvement there from that. So, there's nothing to play for other than pride, and hopefully they go out there and play for as much pride as they can.
So Grizz asked me for a tip last week, and I told him I didn't give a stuff. So I'm going to take that one step further this week. I'm not even going to bother asking you for your tip. I'm just going to say that it's a complete waste of time, and if the players don't care, why should we? But that will do us, Kip. Thank you very much for joining, mate. It's a pleasure, as always, to have you on.
No worries. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to getting back on next year, hopefully.
No worries. And as always, everybody, please like, subscribe, and tell all your friends.